Welcome to Deep Dive by the Quiet Footnote. Have you ever been in one of those frustrating conversations? Maybe negotiating a project deadline or dealing with a sales call you just can't shake.
Or even just trying to agree on where to get dinner.
Exactly. And all that go-to advice like just compromise or find a win-win, it just feels, well,
You feel
useless.
sad.
Totally useless.
You try being rational, you try meeting halfway, and somehow everyone still ends up kind of unsatisfied. Or worse, feeling like they lost out. Today, we're not just rereading that old playbook. We're taking a sledgehammer to it. We're plunging into Chris Voss's game-changing book, Never Split the Difference. It's this really radical reimagining of, well, everything we thought we knew about human interaction and influence.
It really is. So this deep dive, it's all about unpacking its core ideas, these revolutionary tactics, and exploring why it feels, honestly, more urgent than ever right now in our hyper-connected, often kind of polarized world. And for you, someone who's eager to cut through the noise and really understand how influence works, I think you're in for some pretty profound aha moments. As I was researching, looking at reflections and reviews, I just kept saying, wait, that's how it works. It was eye-opening.
It really is true. And what's so compelling, I think, is that this isn't just a tactical manual. I mean, yes, it definitely arms you with powerful techniques, but fundamentally, it's more like a philosophy on how to engage with the world with greater awareness and empathy. We're going to dissect Voss's insights today, hopefully offering you a fresh lens on human motivation and, how people really operate beneath their stated positions.
Okay, let's unpack this then. Chris Voss, former lead international hostage negotiator for the FBI. I mean, wow. He spent years in situations where the stakes were literally life or death. And he observed this pretty glaring blind spot in how most people, especially maybe in the business world, are taught to negotiate. What was that fundamental disconnect he spotted?
Well, if you think about his background, right, he was operating in these environments where concepts like win-win, they weren't just impractical, they were potentially lethal. You can't exactly, split a
You
hostage.
just can't compromise on a life.
Exactly. So he saw this massive chasm between the conventional business school logic, which often frames negotiation as this rational, almost chess-like game.
Yes, spreadsheets and logic.
Right, spreadsheets, logical trade-offs, and the raw, emotional, often totally irrational reality of human behavior under extreme pressure. Hostage takers, or even just say an angry customer, they aren't sitting there calmly analyzing the data points.
That's such a powerful contrast.
Mm-hmm.
So, okay, if the logical, let's all be rational here, approach completely falls apart when emotions are running high, what was the core problem Voss really set out to solve? And how did he, reframe the whole idea of negotiation?
Precisely. His core question wasn't, how do I argue my way to a better deal? It was more like, how do I connect, how do I listen, and how do I guide a conversation so that the other side freely chooses, to align with me?
Hmm.
He realized negotiation is far less about compelling logic and much, much more about navigating the emotional landscape. It's about uncovering those hidden truths, building this really unique kind of trust, and moving the other side not by force, but by truly understanding what they really need deep down. This fusion of FBI tactics with everyday life, it basically tells us that understanding people, that's the real leverage.
Okay, this is where it gets incredibly interesting for me. Because Voss doesn't just, tweak the old negotiation playbook. He totally dismantles it.
Yeah, he really does.
He challenges so many ingrained myths that, honestly, we've all probably been taught or just absorbed. So what are some of these really deeply held beliefs that he just so effectively debunks?
It's vital we tackle these head on because they're like these invisible barriers stopping us from communicating effectively. Let's start with myth number 1. Negotiation is rational.
Okay, the big one.
Yeah. The conventional belief is, if you just present enough facts, enough logic, pile on the numbers, people will inevitably see reason and agree. Voss, however, argues humans don't decide rationally. They rationalize choices they've already made emotionally.
Oh, okay. The feeling comes first.
Exactly. As he puts it, negotiation is not an act of battle. It's a process of discovery. And the big why here for you listening is that if you ignore that emotional undercurrent, you're constantly pushing against this hidden force. You're basically destined to lose the deal because you're talking to the logical brain, but the heart, the emotions, that's what's actually in charge.
Wow. That completely flips our usual approach on its head. We spend so much energy building these airtight, logical cases.
Right, when maybe we should be trying to understand feelings first.
Okay, but what about compromise? That feels like the cornerstone of negotiation for most people. The hallmark of being reasonable.
Which brings us neatly to myth number 2. Splitting the difference is fair and smart.
The default setting.
Totally. Most people assume meeting halfway is the equitable path, right? Ensures everyone's kind of happy. Voss argues, pretty vehemently actually, that compromise often leaves both sides deeply unsatisfied. And worse, it glosses over the fundamental truths of the situation. His brilliant, kind of absurd metaphor.
I love this one.
Yeah, it's great. He says splitting the difference is wearing one black shoe and one brown shoe, thinking you've made a fair compromise.
Huh. It paints such a clear picture.
Doesn't it? It highlights how ridiculous fairness can look when it completely ignores the underlying needs. So for you, the listener, this is crucial. Fairness isn't about dividing the pie equally down the middle. It's about uncovering what each side truly needs to feel whole, to feel like their core concerns were addressed. Meeting halfway. That can often be the absolute worst place to meet because neither side gets what truly matters to them.
That's a really striking analogy, the black and brown shoes. But, for so many of us, compromise feels like the only realistic path sometimes, especially in long-term relationships or complex business deals. How do you apply this never split the difference idea without just seeming completely inflexible or even unreasonable?
That's a really perceptive question. And it gets right to the heart of Voss's philosophy. It's not about being unyielding in your demands like a brick wall. It's about being relentlessly curious about their underlying needs. What's really driving them? You don't split the difference because that difference itself, that gap you're trying to bridge, it often masks what he calls a black swan, that hidden piece of information that could change everything.
Ah, the unknown unknown.
Exactly. So instead, you keep probing, you keep listening, labeling emotions, using those calibrated questions until you find a solution that satisfies a deeper need for both parties, not just a superficial division of resources. And often that leads to a solution that's way more creative and beneficial for everyone than just chopping things in half, which leads us nicely to another really pervasive myth. Myth number 3, yes is the holy grail.
Right. Get them to say yes. That's the win.
That's what conventional wisdom tells us. Push for yes to win the negotiation. Voss completely challenges this. He says yes is often counterfeit.
Counterfeit. How so?
Well, it can be just a polite dismissal, right? A way to placate you, make you go away, or simply ends the conversation without real commitment. He says yes is nothing without how. You need to know how they'll implement it. But no, paradoxically, no is pure gold.
Okay, now that sounds completely backward. Why is no gold?
Because no is a declaration of autonomy. Think about it. When someone feels safe enough to say no to you, they're asserting their boundaries. And that, counterintuitively, builds trust.
Because they feel they have control.
Precisely. It signals honesty. It gives them that vital sense of control, and that feeling of security is what actually opens the door to genuine dialogue. It makes any eventual yes far more meaningful, far more durable, because it came from a place of safety, not pressure.
Wow. It really does upend how we usually think about conversations, especially difficult ones.
Yeah.
So if we're constantly trying to build these logical cases and just chase it, are we essentially, just talking past each other? Or maybe even pushing people further away by ignoring their feelings and their need for control.
That's exactly his point. We're missing the real levers. Instead, he talks about using psychological jujitsu.
Okay, psychological jujitsu, explain that.
It's about using the other person's energy, their resistance, even their initial, perhaps unreasonable demands to your advantage. Instead of meeting force with force, you subtly redirect their momentum. You guide them towards a solution that ultimately aligns with your goals, but crucially, often makes them feel like they discovered it, like it was their idea all along.
That's clever.
It is. And these concepts, they're revolutionary because they fundamentally shift negotiation away from being a game of logic and sheer toughness to one focused on emotions, on deep curiosity, and on genuine empathy. It's about understanding the human being behind the demands. And that, I think, is the true unheard message of the book.
Okay, so Voss isn't afraid to tear down the old negotiation playbook. We get that. But what does he actually build in its place?
Yeah.
Because it's not enough to just know what not to do, right?
Huh?
We need the actionable stuff, the toolkit he promises.
Absolutely. And what's really insightful is just how counterintuitive some of these tactics are at first glance. Yet they're rooted in deep psychological understanding. Let's start with the power of no, which we touched on. As we discussed, Voss argues no is safer and actually empowers people. Sounds paradoxical, but it's incredibly effective in practice. So instead of asking in a salary negotiation, say, can we agree I deserve a raise? which kind of invites a non-committal yes or maybe just an easy no to shut it down.
Right. It's a bit confrontational, maybe?
It can be. Instead, you could try something like, would it be unreasonable to revisit my salary given the extra responsibilities I've taken on?
Ah, so you're asking for a no that actually means yes, let's talk.
Exactly. When your boss says no, that wouldn't be unreasonable, guess what? They've just committed to having the conversation. Now, it's crucial to get the tone right here. This isn't about being aggressive or sarcastic, like, would it be unreasonable? That'll backfire. It's about genuine curiosity, creating safety, disarming, not provoking.
That's brilliant. It feels like you're creating this pathway for them to agree with you just by inviting a very specific kind of no. Okay, what else is in the toolkit? You mentioned the difference between that's right and you're right. Seems subtle.
It is subtle, but it's profoundly transformative. When someone says you're right, think about how that often feels. It can be a bit dismissive, right? Like, okay, fine, you're right. Now can we move on?
Yeah, like they're just trying to end it.
Exactly. But when they genuinely lean in and say, that's right, that signifies something much deeper. It means they truly feel heard, understood, and validated. The practice here is to summarize their position back to them, not just the facts, but their feelings, their needs, their perspective, until they naturally respond with, that's right. That's the sign of a real breakthrough. It shifts them from mere compliance to genuine cooperation. And another really elegant move, part of that psychological jujitsu we talked about, is using calibrated questions, especially those starting with how and what.
Okay, give me an example.
So instead of stating a roadblock like, I can't pay that price, which often just elicits a defensive, well, that's the price.
Yeah, it creates a stalemate.
Right. You ask a question like, how am I supposed to do that? Delivered calmly, genuinely. This isn't hostile. It subtly hands the problem back to the other side. It makes them your problem solver. It's a masterful way to steer the conversation using questions instead of getting into a fight with statements.
So it makes them feel like they're discovering the solution, even if you've gently guided them there. Clever. But what if you ask, how am I supposed to do that? And the other side just shrugs and says, hey, that's your problem. How do you navigate that moment when your jujitsu seems to hit a wall?
That's a great question, and that's where the deeper layers of Voss's work really come into play. If they push back like that, that's your problem. It likely means you haven't yet uncovered their deeper motivations, or perhaps their own constraints or fears. You don't just push harder with the same question. You pivot. You go back to tactical empathy. You might try labeling their emotion. You could say something tentative like, it sounds like you're feeling a bit stuck on this point as well. Or maybe you mirror their last few words like, my problem. The point isn't to force an immediate answer out of them, but to keep probing gently, keep building that connection until a path forward starts to emerge. And that brings us to labeling emotions itself. Instead of just blindly sympathizing like, oh, I understand you're frustrated, or worse, agreeing with their potentially distorted view, you're right, this is unfair. You simply call out what you sense. It seems like you're frustrated.
The it seems like part is key, isn't it?
Absolutely key. The magic isn't just naming the emotion. It's the tentative nature of the label, it seems like, it sounds like, it looks like. This does two things. One, it invites them to correct you if you're wrong, which further engages them in the conversation. And two, it acknowledges their reality, their feeling, without you having to agree with it or concede anything. It's a very precise de-escalation tool. It makes them feel seen, heard, validated, often maybe for the first time in that interaction.
That feels both respectful and incredibly freeing. Okay, what else? There's the black swan concept.
Ah, yes, the black swan concept. This is profound. It's the idea that in every negotiation, there's almost always an unknown. A small piece of hidden information that, if uncovered, could completely change the entire dynamic. The game changer. Voss gives this example from his FBI days, where a hostage-taker's hidden fear wasn't about the police, but about his own boss finding out he'd messed up. Discovering that totally shifted how they approached the negotiation.
Wow.
So this concept encourages relentless curiosity instead of assuming you know everything. It prompts you to constantly ask yourself, what am I missing here? What crucial piece don't I know yet? It's about playing poker in life, not checkers, reading those subtle signals, sensing the hidden tells, looking for those unexpected factors that reveal those game-changing unknowns.
It's really clear these aren't just, clever tricks or tactics. They're about understanding human psychology at a much deeper, much more nuanced level. And, while this book was written almost a decade ago, it feels like Voss's ideas are just resonating even louder today. Why do you think these principles feel so particularly urgent right now, more than ever?
Yeah, it's striking how relevant it remains, maybe even more so. If you look at the last decade, we've basically seen this perfect storm brewing that makes Voss's work not just relevant, but I'd argue absolutely essential. Firstly, negotiation is no longer niche. Voss always emphasized that life is negotiation, and boy, was he right. Think about it. Freelancing rates, family dynamics, those endless customer service calls, even making medical decisions with doctors.
It's everywhere.
Everywhere. The ability to win without alienating, as he might put it, has become fundamental survival gear in today's really fluid world. Then you layer on top of that the massive challenge of digital and remote communication. Tone gets flattened, nuance disappears on screens. Zoom, Slack, WhatsApp, email.
Oh yeah, misunderstandings are so easy.
Rampant. So Voss's principles, like mirroring body language, even subtly on video, labeling perceived emotions, it seems like maybe you're concerned about X, they become crucial tools just to combat miscommunication and build some kind of connection in an environment that's often starved of it.
And tragically, this flattened communication often just pours gasoline on what we're seeing in the wider society.
Exactly my third point. Rising polarization. Whether it's politics, social media debates, or even disagreements in the workplace, logic rarely changes minds when people are dug into their positions. Empathy, however, sometimes can. Voss's central argument that feelings drive decisions is more critical than ever for diffusing tension. If you can't accurately label someone's underlying emotion, like, it seems like the situation feels deeply unfair to you, instead of just attacking their logic, well, that's almost like a superpower for fostering understanding, even if you don't agree.
A superpower we could definitely use more of.
Couldn't we all? Fourthly, there's a whole emerging landscape of AI as the silent negotiator. Think about it. More and more of our first-touch interactions are with bots, customer service chats, automated booking systems. Voss would likely have a lot to say about strategies for navigating these. How do you get past the bot to a human when needed? And critically, how do you maintain that human edge, empathy, intuition once a person is involved? He'd certainly caution against letting the interaction turn you robotic, too.
He's a really interesting angle, the AI negotiator.
And finally, maybe overarching all of this, we undeniably live in a black swan world. The last few years alone. COVID, supply chain chaos, massive AI disruption, economic uncertainty. It's just been a constant parade of unpredictable events, of unknowns. So Voss's insistence on curiosity, on relentlessly asking, what am I missing? What crucial thing don't I know? That mindset is essential when certainty feels like a luxury and the ground is constantly shifting beneath our feet.
You know, it really lands for me. What's truly fascinating is that the book starts feeling less like a business manual and more like, I don't know, a survival guide for how to talk human in a world that often seems to forget how. It really boils down to presence, doesn't it? Genuine connection. So what does this all mean for you, the listener, as you navigate your own conversations day to day? Let's try and bring it all together. First, maybe recap those top insights Voss really wants you to internalize. And then let's touch on that deeper, often unheard message, maybe hiding beneath the tactics.
Okay. If you internalize just 5 key principles from Voss, let them be these. First, no is often more powerful than yes. Don't just chase agreement. Learn to seek out honest rejection. It builds trust, and it's a pathway to real understanding. Second, tactical empathy beats logic. People crave being understood, not being out-argued. Connecting emotionally opens doors that logic alone simply cannot. Third, calibrated questions create control. They subtly guide others to help solve your problems, often while making them feel empowered in the process. Fourth, never split the difference, because that easy compromise often ignores the deeper truths and leaves both sides ultimately unfulfilled. Find the creative solution instead. And fifth, always look for the black swan. Stay curious. Assume there's something important you don't know, because there usually is, and finding it can change everything. But beyond these really practical tools, there's that unheard message weaving through his work, and it's this. Negotiation isn't fundamentally about getting more stuff. It's about understanding people more deeply. That's the core. That's the core. It's about establishing safety before you even think about persuasion. Recognizing that empathy isn't weakness, it's actually the ultimate leverage. Accepting that control is often an illusion you strategically grant to others to make them feel safe. Understanding that the real truth frequently hides in what's not being said. Fundamentally, Voss tells us that negotiation isn't some separate activity, it's just life. It's a continuous conversation navigating human fears, hopes, needs, and egos.
And that connects so profoundly, I think, to the idea that the real key to influence isn't about manipulation or slick power plays. It's about presence. It's about truly seeing and acknowledging the other person as fully human, even when you're in the middle of intense conflict or disagreement. So for you, listening, think about this. How often do you maybe split the difference in your own life? Not because it's the best outcome, but just to avoid discomfort.
Good question.
Maybe you compromise a creative vision you really believe in. Or perhaps you say yes to a request when you truly mean no, effectively bargaining against your own values or needs just to keep the peace. Voss's book, in many ways, is this profound challenge to stop doing that. It's a playbook that shows negotiation isn't really about logic or compromise in the traditional sense. It's about empathy, deep curiosity, and that psychological jujitsu winning by uncovering the real truth instead of just settling for half. The value we can glean from this deep dive is, I think, immense. These aren't just tactics for a boardroom or a car dealership. They're fundamental principles for better communication, deeper understanding across your entire life. Whether you're dealing with a difficult client or, just trying to decide what movie to watch tonight with your partner.
So my final provocative thought for you is this. If influence truly stems from presence and deep understanding, what hidden truths might you uncover in your very next conversation, big or small, if you approached it not as a battle you need to win, but as an act of discovery? We really encourage you to test out just one of these tactics this week. Maybe try mirroring someone in a casual chat, just subtly repeat their last few words, or attempt a calibrated question like, how can we make this work? In a low-stakes interaction, and just notice the difference it makes. Because the real learning, the real magic, happens when you start applying these tools, however imperfectly at first, in your everyday interactions. That's where the change begins.